Halo Wars 2 is a real-time strategy game, and it was released on February 21st, 2017. After the success of the mainline Halo games, Creative Assembly was brought on to develop the sequel, with Blur Studios returning to handle the cutscenes. Set 28 years after the original, this game ties into Halo's evolving storyline. I remember when the betas released, I was in high school having a blast playing it, even more so when the game fully released. After some time away from these games, I wanted to attempt some challenge runs. Without further ado, let's get into the rules. This challenge is infantry only, meaning I can only use soldier-based units like Marines, Spartans, Cyclopses, and other ground-based troops. These units are trained in the barracks, with Marines also available at the center of the base. No vehicles, no air units, just boots on the ground. Can this be done? Branching off of that is if I'm given non-infantry units at the start or throughout the level, I must sacrifice them. Upgrades and player powers are allowed. Next, the game's difficulty will be on legendary, meaning the hardest difficulty. Subsequently, I'm allowed to use skulls. These are modifiers to the campaign that will allow the player access to bonuses or hindrances. I'll put the exact skulls I'm using on the screen now. I use 12 skulls that range from increasing enemy health to heroes releasing a nuke on defeat. Afterwards, I must beat the game and DLCs. There are over 10 plus missions that range from 10 minutes to over an hour to complete. Lastly, glitches and or exploits are allowed, so expect me to take full advantage of my arsenal. I'm really excited to share this challenge with you guys since it's been awesome getting back into Halo Wars, and I've never attempted a challenge run before on Halo Wars 2. Make sure to smash the like button, comment, and subscribe to help support me and the channel. Without further ado, let's get into the run. Starting Halo Wars 2, we see a cutscene. Crew members clamber out of cryotubes while Serena, the AI from the first game, talks. Serena explains that it's been 28 years and that numerous pieces of the ship have been repaired. She finishes by saying how the AI are to be terminated after a certain amount of time, so she did it herself. For those who didn't play Halo Wars 1, this is a pretty throwaway line, but I'm glad they added it for those who enjoyed the first game. We meet Captain Cutter, Professor Anders, and various other crew members. Learning that this new location, aka the Ark, has some sort of UNSC distress signal, Captain Cutter sends out Red Team to investigate. After a short section of driving a Warthog around, the Spartans find the facility. The Warthog is the only unit available in the first mission, so there is no way around that. Inside the research post, we witness one of the best cutscenes in the entire game. Atriox makes his entrance, taking on an entire squad of Spartans alone. The sheer brutality and confidence he exudes instantly cements him as a serious threat. This was an incredible way to introduce the character, and I think it was handled masterfully. With our Spartans battered and nearly defeated, they make a quick escape. We then see the sheer size of the banished army, and yeah. Next, we learn of Atriox's rise through Isabel, the AI we rescued from the research post. Once again, we get an amazing cutscene. I praised Blur Studios for their work in the first game's cutscene, and the second is even better. Though I have to say, it was a bit jarring to get used to the character recasts, but I like to think they even have more character development now. I'm curious to hear below your thoughts on the cast difference between the first and the second game. Now, this next part I was debating on whether or not to include in the video. After 5 to 6 hours, I was having a blast running infantry only. I started with 14 skulls, but I soon realized one of them was ruining the challenge, spawning vehicles whenever I lost a base. I disabled it, but then later on I realized with the skulls I had, things were rather too simple. I was dealing such massive damage alongside having few skulls with downsides. Near the end of the first stream, I was thinking about restarting, since I had changed things during the run and felt it was unfair. The next day, I started the challenge anew, this time keeping the skulls I started with at the beginning and not switching them during the run. I made sure to not have the skull equipped where it gives me vehicles, and now we load up the first mission on Legendary. As I mentioned before, the starting mission requires the player to only use a Warthog, so that is unavoidable. Escaping the banished forces, Alice covers us as we retreat. Back on the ship, Isabel explains what took place, and we get a motivating message from Captain Cutter. I feel it makes the player immersed in the world having strong dialogue like that, alongside the many faces and people seen on the bridge. Hearing it riled me up for the next mission. Afterwards, we plan on investigating what the banished are up to, alongside putting a dent in their numbers. The mission starts with Jerome and some infantry units, and we need to take down a small banished camp. Making our way through, we capture a base and start expanding our troops. The first thing I wanted to do was go around and capture the various power nodes around the map. Second was placing troops in fortified positions. This is meant to keep enemies at bay and also for information. There were times where it was nice to know a few seconds ahead of time if an attack was coming. Eventually, it was time to push the banished back fully, Advancing past grunts, elites, hunters, and other enemies was tough, and they made me fight for every inch. Set up troops around the perimeter of the base and had them focus fire. Destroying the base, Decimus, one of Atriox's right-hand men, takes the fight to us. Using insanely OP power armor alongside countless enemy waves to protect them, it ended up being an intense battle. We chip away at his health, and eventually we claim victory. Pushing Decimus back and defeating the remaining banished troops, we press onwards to the next mission. Ascension is one of my favorite missions in the game. Another version is in a later mission. To start, we get a few Cyclopses alongside our main Spartan Jerome. Unfortunately, we also get some Warthogs. For now, until we can send them to their doom, we'll put them off into a corner. The next thing I didn't mention in the rules, but I felt it wasn't needed since it's implied. Essentially, since I can't use vehicles or air units, I cannot Spartan jack an enemy vehicle. I used the same logic in the first game during the infantry only challenge run. I'm curious to hear your feedback on this, since I'll be doing more Halo Wars content in the future. Sending the Wraith and Warthogs to their doom, we get back on track. Find out what's been attacking the banished mining operation, since earlier in the mission there's banished equipment destroyed everywhere. Further up the path, we are able to start building a base. Once again, the game forces vehicles and air units down our gullet, so I sent them to their demise. Make sure to build multiple supply pads, so I have more than enough resources for troop development. With each mission, the player is awarded more tools, upgrades, etc. Later on, we will see the newest infantry added to this game. The main objective of this is to capture and hold the majority of the control towers. This is easier said than done, since 2 of the capture points are right next to the banished bases. I opted to go for 2 points at the beginning, and then as things looked to be in our favor, push for the final tower. With perseverance, we hold the towers and complete the mission. Professor Anders flies down on a ship to investigate. 130 marked a tough moment in the challenge. With limited resources and troops, Alice and other UNSC members must evacuate with heavy banished resistance. For this mission, I opted to use Alice as the main gun, going around doing the main objective. On the flip side, the UNSC troops I rescued along the way will gather up resources scattered around the map. This worked out well since I didn't need to worry about Alice's health since she has shields. Another thing was that I didn't want to lose units if I didn't have to. Well, that is until I rescued the Warthogs and knew immediately that they had to be sacrificed. Reaching the final area, this time, our challenge is to bunker down for incoming waves. This was quite brutal having to deal with the large array of foes thrown my way. I ended up having this really strange bug where an enemy basically just said nah, then dipped away from the battlefield. Because I am forced to stay inside this bubble until extraction comes, the game doesn't let me go back to the starting areas. Well, I waited for a while, thinking maybe the enemy will come back after some time. No, they did not. I ended up having to restart the mission, because otherwise I would have ended up waiting an hour plus. Getting back to a similar point, we take on the incoming waves. The final wave consists of jump pack brutes, and I was hoping the game would not bug out again. Thankfully, things worked out, and we completed another mission. The cartographer was next, and this was a relatively easy mission. Here, we take on the various Forerunner conduits and must destroy them. Simple and easy. Well, the Banished have a base up ahead, and this was heavily fortified. It took at least 3 attempts to take the base. There were countless adversaries roaming around. When I took one down, another one would spawn from the base or the nearby mini-bases. Needless to say, yeah, this was one tough nut to crack. It did feel extremely satisfying to destroy the base and claim it as our own. Afterwards, I set out to destroy the remaining Forerunner conduits so that we could reach the main terminal at the end of the mission. Anders uses the terminal and learns of the Ark's weapon systems and teleportation devices. Essentially, the Ark creates halos, has devastating plasma weaponry, and teleportation rings that allow Atriox's forces to move about. The main objective of the next mission is to cripple the Banished portal network, hindering their troop movement. Douglas, the Spartan who was injured by Atriox, joins the fight. We are now able to command him. Unfortunately, he did Spartan Jack a Wraith, so he's gonna have to get injured again, I suppose. There are various small banished teleportation devices around the map, and if taken out, this will stop incoming reinforcements to the area, which is quite helpful. Another thing is that there are UNSC forces held prisoner by the Banished. If the surrounding enemies are defeated, we can add the troops to our roster. Building up a base, we learn that the Banished supercarrier is raining down fire on the map, but only if we enter the bombardment zone. Instead, we will go through the various teleporters throughout the map. Now, I did sprinkle this in here and there. The infantry only can be rather tough. Halo Wars is a rock, paper, scissors kind of game where certain units counter others or may be well-rounded units. When purchasing units, an indicator will be shown to explain the pros and cons. There are various pictures alongside some or all being colored. Let's use the Marines as an example. There are images of infantry, vehicles, air units, and super units. Each of these colored in this case, but will vary with each unit. Green means that this is a good unit to counter with, yellow is okay, red is bad, and if translucent means it cannot attack that enemy type. With this in mind, we are generally okay against most units, but then when there's like 20 billion tanks that roll up, it gets a bit brutal to manage. I figured I would mention this though for those who are unfamiliar. After going through the banished forces and destroying the main portal network in Tenna, Decimus comes out to play again, this time with more damaging attacks and a plethora of enemies to deal with. I really enjoyed this boss battle, but ultimately we defeat Decimus and finish another mission. From the Deep has Alice and UNSC forces defend against relentless wave of banished forces. We started with a few tanks and warthogs, so I sent them into the pits hoping they would get quickly taken down. My strategy for this mission was to set up units at 3 key locations: the main beach, the side beach, and near the back end of the base. I did this progressively as the mission went on since enemies came through at different points. Eventually they started invading from every direction. The main difficulty of this mission was dealing with the new Locust units. These vehicles have long-range plasma beams, so taking them down can be a pain. I ended up losing the primary beach since like 5 to 6 locusts came out of nowhere wreaking havoc. One thing that made infantry only quite tough was how non-tanky they are. Because of this, I had to constantly train new troops. The first game didn't have this, but the second game has nightingales which heal your units. Since I can't use that, I have to only heal through my ability, which takes a fair amount of time to regenerate. The final stage of this mission, the Banished sent a scarab to our base. Yeah, this was already grueling dealing with the various locust squads, but now we have an even scarier version coming at our base. Since I was already on the back foot with losing various strategic positions, the Scarab didn't have much trouble getting to the base. This was a double-edged sword though, since I will get damage from my turrets, but will also get a ton of damage from the Scarab. In the end, the Scarab was destroyed and we beat the mission. Things have been getting tougher and tougher with each mission it seems, and I'm excited to see how things go later on. For the next mission, we get a cutscene showing the main banished ship attacking the UNSC forces. Anders comes up with a plan and ensures that we must use the halo that is part of the emergency forerunner system. With not enough time for that option, we must use the Ark's weapon systems instead. Hold the Line is another awesome mission in the game. The player must protect the forerunner technology while it pierces the enemy's shields. Starting off, the player will need to upgrade the base and get troops rolling out. There are various turret locations alongside mini bases. Made sure to put a turret on each location and upgrade every other turret. For instance, I would do anti-infantry, anti-vehicle, repeated. Thankfully, we get plenty of prep time before the Banished actually show up, but when they do, shit really hits the fan. The first few waves are infantry units coming from the north side, and as the mission goes on, enemies will be increasingly more difficult and will come in from various other routes. I opted to place my units in 2 key positions. First was alongside the east barricade. Made sure to put our Spartan there since I felt out of the 2 positions, this would be the first to fall. Second was near the center of the map. Here I placed a bunch of Cyclopses and Marines. I grouped them up as much as possible and made sure to cover all ways around. I did this because it makes things extremely tough for the enemies to get around, allowing a bunch of damage on them from the turrets, and it's also just super funny to see them bug out. Near the end, things got really hectic. Enemies were coming in from every direction, seemingly never ending. With the shields down, we complete the mission and head back to the Spirit of Fire. A fun and tough mission is when we get snipers. They deal insane damage and have the ability to cloak. At the start, we must hold off against a wave of banished enemies, then afterwards secure a base. For about half the mission, we are unable to really build up a force and only have a mini base with 2 build sites. Went with a bunch of Marines and snipers, Marines to hold the front line, and snipers to lurk behind them and get insane damage. One thing to note is that the player is forced to protect these Kodiak units. Thankfully, they are not under our control, so it doesn't violate the rules. Securing this base was a brutal feat, but we were only halfway through the mission. Now we cut to Alice's perspective. Her main objective is to place 3 Kodiaks around the center ring. Since we were doing an infantry only run, I sent them to their doom. Later on, when all the enemies are defeated, then I will place them since that is unavoidable. This was the tougher of the 2 halves. With multiple banished encampments and mini bases along the way, there was fierce resistance and ended up taking me a while to get through. Infantry definitely gets the job done, but it takes a few breakthrough attempts. Finally, we placed all the Kodiaks. Jerome flies in on a Pelican and attempts to board the banished supercarrier. Easily one of the most cinematic cutscenes in the game is this one. Jerome and Isabel teleport aboard the enemy vessel. Isabel uses the supercarrier's weapon to fire on the installation, forcing the Forerunners to counterattack. Jerome, on the other hand, defends Isabel. Seeing all the Sentinels form together and come crashing down the ship is cool to witness. The Foundry, dear god, was this insanely tough. First time around, well, I failed pretty miserably. There's a point where the player needs to take down an enemy hero, specifically an honor guard. Well, I had very few units and ended up dying way too fast. The second time around, I played things much more cautiously. Similarly to the first attempt, I sent sent the vehicles provided at the start to their doom. Instead of using all my units, I only used the Spartans. This way, with the limited resources and the Spartans' shields, I didn't need to worry about healing. Going through the various enemies, I watched for my Spartans' health and retreat when necessary. After taking most of the enemies down, the final one was the honor guard and his nearby troops, so I sent all of my units after them. We did end up taking him down, but he did tactical nuke my units. To capture the scarab that they were working on, I opted to just place him into a corner since I didn't want to destroy a ton of units if I sent him to his doom. And even if I did send him to his doom, it would take a super long time. I also wasn't sure if it was destroyed if it would fail the mission, so better to be safe than sorry. Capturing a few bases and some mini bases, the objective now is to destroy the banished and cut off more of their reinforcements. This was damn difficult, I must say, and it was nearly a loss. It ended up taking more than a few attempts at destroying their base. It was cool to see my troops come in one by one though for the final assault. In the end, with 2 seconds to spare, we destroyed the banished base. I was quite surprised to say the least, but hey, a win's a win. We clean up the remaining few enemies and the mission ends. Similarly to the third mission, this mission has the player capture and defend 3 key locations. It begins with the base under attack. I sent vehicles and air units to their demise that were given at the beginning. I started to train up units to prepare for what was to come. One of the differences from this mission to the third is that a massive Forerunner Retriever Sentinel will roam the area. This is a double-edged sword since it will attack me and the banished units. At first, I wanted to defend A and B since they were closest to my base. Even though they were closer, things were still intense. Enemy warlords and wraiths were sent in masses and very often. Near B's capture point, there is a secondary UNSC base. Once the enemies are cleared, the player gains access to it and its resources. This took quite some time, as the enemies were both numerous and elusive when low on health. There were plenty of times in the mission where things were uncertain. Both myself and the Banish had very similar capture point progress, so I made sure to not lose the advantage, or at least give them a damn tough time. After a long battle, we used the Sentinel to open the control room and now have access to the final mission. Easily one of the most memorable from this challenge was the final mission of the base game. Here we must defend Professor Anders as she tinkers with the Forerunner Control Center. Well, the first attempt did not go so smoothly. Let's just say Professor Anders learned the hard way regarding orbital strikes. The next day I attempted the mission again and changed my strategy a bit. This time I will place the 3 Spartans each at different entrances and make sure there are plenty of infantry units scattered about. ODSTs were the GOAT in this mission since I could call them down very often. One of the optional objectives, but I believe ties into the enemy density, is the warlords surrounding the control center. My game plan for them wasn't to fight with normal means, instead just bombarding them with active abilities. It's had to be done a few times since there are a ton of enemies around protecting the warlords. In the final moments we are notified that 3 scarabs are coming our way, and yeah, damn, this was tough. The first attempt I made the mistake of trying to take them down. Instead, I will be using my troops as cannon fodder to delay the damage on the shields. Though it wasn't a very commander thing to do, it worked nonetheless. The final cutscene shows Professor Anders using the Forerunner technology to launch the banished forces into the air. Anders then gets teleported alongside the new Halo. Captain Cutter says we still have a lot of work to do, shows a map. The map pans towards Atriox's perspective, and he's pissed. Definitely did not feel as rewarding as the first game, since it seems like Atriox's army is still very massive. With the base game completed, let's head into the various DLCs. Coming back to do the DLCs, first of which is the ODST one. This DLC had an epic intro with the ODSTs coming down in pods. Our objective in this level is to destroy the Forerunner cloaking device. I should mention that the main game of Halo Wars 2, I remembered more of the missions than not. Well, in the DLCs, I completely forgot what took place. I definitely have played through them before, but it has been quite some time. We find new Sentinels in these ODST missions alongside some new banished forces. One addition is the Sentinel that has a shield on its front side. Another thing is that usually ODSTs are normal troops. Well, our hero ODSTs are much different. Each of these guys has some sort of power weapon such as a sniper rifle, Spartan laser, and rocket launcher. These guys shred, and I found them to be really fun to use. Nearby is a damaged banished base that has been attacked by the Forerunners. We claim the base as our own and start to expand our ground operations. To destroy the Forerunner cloaking device, the player must capture 5 control towers around the map. This is definitely easier said than done, since countless banished and sentinel units roam the areas. There are even multiple banished bases. Fighting our way through the banish and capturing all the control towers, we reach the main console. When activated, this unleashed a retriever sentinel to destroy us. Make sure to focus fire on the retriever until it forces me to back away when the swarm arrives. Well, near the end, I end up bugging the retriever. Essentially, I used the ODST's EMP ability, which dazed the retriever. retriever. All good and normal there. Well, it bugged out, causing the swarm to follow the retriever. Let's just say we lost a lot of troops that day. The final mission of the ODST DLC has a UNSC super unit firing on a ship that has several charging columns nearby. Our goal is to stop the ship's launch, since it's pointed directly at the UNSC's Spirit of Fire. To accomplish this, we must go around the map and deactivate several Forerunner devices. Unfortunately, the game forces you to use a Colossus mech to stomp the charging columns. Since this was needed for the mission, I opted to only use it to stomp the actual columns. Afterwards, I would just send the Colossus to its doom. There are several bases along the way, so I make sure to keep building our presence on the ground. I built a variety of troops, but stuck mostly with the Marines since they are all around good units. Final charging column, well, I ended up getting it near the last second. I took too long and was happily surprised that it ended up working. With all the charging columns destroyed, we must defeat the remaining banished around the center of the map. While a colony shows up, this hunter boss, and tries to stop us. Marines are good against most units, but when the enemies have a tanky health bar, Marines fall short damage-wise. There were plenty of times when fighting the boss where my Marines could just not defeat the enemies. This resulted in me losing a ton of troops. In the end, we defeat Colony and destroy the ship. This was the first of the 2 DLCs, so let's head into the final DLC. The last thing we will do in this challenge run is go through the Flood DLC. As the cutscene is playing, let's quickly reflect on the run. Infantry Only has been quite intense, but especially more so in the late main game missions and the DLC. Legendary with the Skulls On has really made things more fun but also challenging, especially combined with Infantry Only. Marines are the most solid choice to go with, but it is also nice to have more specialized units in the barracks, such as Cyclopses for heavy armor, or Snipers for infantry. What can we expect from the final DLC? Will it be easier or tougher than the main game? Well, I shouldn't have said it was too easy at the beginning. In this DLC, we took control of banished forces, but specifically 2 brute heroes named Vortis and Pavium. The goal of this mission is to break into High Charity and loot its contents. High Charity is a Covenant vessel, and for those who played Halo 3 will know the horrors that lurk within. Our objective in this level is to protect a Scarab while delaying Sentinel reinforcements. I'm not able to control the Scarab, so this won't be counted against us. Similarly to the UNSC side, I went with a ton of grunts and scattered some hunters and elite rangers. Later on, we find out that the UNSC has a small recon operation out here, so we need to take them out before they report us. Afterwards, we can claim that mini-base as ours. The final parts of the mission has the Scarab go through heavily fortified Forerunner turret emplacements, while Vortis figures out the Forerunner puzzle that controls the Sentinels. A Retriever Sentinel shows itself, and now we must solve the puzzle. This was one underwhelming puzzle, I must say. It basically tells you when an answer is correct, which is nice, but definitely not challenging whatsoever. The mission completed, the Scarab blasts a hole into High Charity. Easily one of the best cutscenes from the DLCs is this one right here. For those who haven't seen it or are in need of a refresher, well, I'll let the full thing play out, and it's pretty damn epic. The next mission, oh gosh, this was a tough one. I would argue that this and or the final mission of this DLC is the hardest with all the parameters active. Let me explain. First, the player needs to defend against waves of flood enemies. Simple and easy enough, but as the mission goes on, the players continually push back to further positions. With each pushback, enemy numbers increase and also enemy variety. One thing that I was really iffy about was the flood vehicle forms. I found this to be quite strange, but assume it is infecting the troop on the vehicle which then spreads to the vehicle, or maybe it infected a troop and using its knowledge climbed aboard the vehicle. It's strange to see flood mass on non-organic things, but then again, High Charity was infested with a flood. Not only the people were infected, but also the entire ship itself. So if I had to infer, the flood since the earlier Halo games adapted in response to their environment. Or maybe the devs just thought it looked cool. Maybe I'm looking too into it, but it's something worth mentioning nonetheless. Second is that these waves come in from multiple directions, especially the final area that needs defending. When they do come in from a direction, everything is being sent. Blood infection form, infected vehicles, and so on. If I didn't have a variety of units ready to attack them, my units would practically get wiped out. Thirdly, because I have the Firestarter Skull on, which causes Grunt and Marines to explode on death, but this also applies to flood units. This was a double-edged sword, since my units would get infected and instantly die, but then that flood form's death would cause 10 mini explosions, nuking my units. Lastly is the final area. It is heavily implied to get the blisterback reinforcements on the side. I opted not to use them since it felt against the rules, even if I wasn't directly controlling them. With all these factors and more, well, it took many attempts to complete this. I ended up needing to find an exploit since the final area was so damn intense. Each time I lost, I realized that the flood units pretty much targeted Pavium even if there are other nearby units. When Pavium dies, the mission fails. Because of this, I found a funny exploit around this. There are blisterbacks that can be activated behind the final base location. Well, I didn't want to activate them, instead just place Pavium nearby. Since the only way to get over there is a light bridge, this makes Pavium basically invincible for the time being. Near the end of the mission, after holding the line, we reactivate the light bridge and run away from the flood as fast as we can. The next mission followed the trend of extremely difficult. The main objective of this mission is to reactivate the drills in the middle of the map, which will result in nearby flood bases to be destroyed. There are a few different things about this mission. The player can find these ovomorph-like pods from the Alien franchise scattered around the map. These function exactly the same as that series. Next is that power can only be obtained by crystallized structures found on the ground. This is super cool, but also tedious to obtain. I'd love to hear what you guys think if you've played this mission. Did you enjoy the change, or find it to be annoying? I go around and collect the various power crystals on the map, which took some time to accomplish. Each drill in the middle needs 8k power to be activated, so we need 24k total. As the mission progresses, a flood rupture pressure warning will be displayed. When it reaches critical levels, flood forms will spew out and come to attack the base. At first, this is quite manageable, but as the mission progresses, the flood will send out hero units. They have 2 hero units, I believe. First is this 4-story titan that roams about. Next is this flood infector form. This one I'm not actually sure if it is a hero or not, or just some tanky enemy unit. Nonetheless, it is still really cool. Whatever units the player owns, these infectors will counter with the appropriate unit. Since we're using infantry, the basic flood infection forms are sent. The hardest part of this mission, and where I failed a few times, was the end section. Here, the player must defend the drills as they ignite the fuel below the surface. Well, the flood did not appreciate that and sent plenty of hero units my way. Similarly to the previous mission, it seemed like they purposefully targeted Pavium, and once again he's tied to mission success, so he can't fall in battle. I had to restart a few times to get things working. Ultimately, all the drills are activated and we complete the mission. It's crazy how much more difficult the DLCs have been compared to the main game. The archive took finite troops and resources to its limit. Must go through Forerunner defense systems in order to reactivate the flood elimination protocol. Compared to other missions, this had a lot of verticality and places where jump pack brutes were actually useful in. I enjoyed the change of pace. Next was that there are still plenty of defense systems active that we must get around. One of them helped out massively since it dispatched of a flood hero unit. The biggest challenge to overcome in this mission was the final area. Here the player needs to defend 3 locks against waves of flood forces. As more locks are quote-unquote clean, this will increase the facility's power percentage. The opposite is true if the flood makes the locks quote-unquote dirty. There are countless enemies coming from every direction and multiple hero units. Once again, this mission took a few tries, but it was damn satisfying to complete. At the end, we reactivate the Sentinel defense system, and now we must eradicate the flood entirely. Final mission in this DLC and the challenge as a whole is Manifestation. Starting off, the player will need to defend the base. Funny thing though is after about 2 to 3 minutes, the player is left alone. Taking full advantage of not being threatened, I upgraded my base and units to the max. Progressing through the level, we find a massive flood tentacle, and so yeah, something big is coming to mess us up. Nearby, we find a small flood base. After destroying it, we are able to place a long-range plasma turret, able to fire on the tentacle. Easily the coolest part of this mission is fighting the proto-Gravemind boss in the middle. This is a multi-stage boss fight and was super awesome. A few things to note is there are plenty of flood tentacles around the area. For some reason, I don't think they ever attacked my units. I was quite shocked, but then I remembered it occurring in previous missions. This is something I do not know, and so I'm curious if anyone has the answers. They only attack vehicles or air units, so that's why. Did they just bug out? I'm interested to hear. We go through the first phase, and at the end, we must fire into its mouth. This is then repeated 4 times with the other phases of the boss. Final section of this boss fight has the player clean a Forerunner interlock on the outskirts of the map. Well, I ended up getting this hilarious glitch. Either one of my units or the enemies bugged out and died, caused 20 mini explosions, instantly destroying the Retriever Sentinel. Well, this bugged the game out. I was curious to see if it would fix itself, but yeah, that never happened. So I need to restart. Getting back to a similar point, we get to the Retriever Sentinel, and thankfully it did not bug out this time. I opted to put the Retriever in the corner of the map and not to use it. This did make the mission take a lot longer since it really wants the player to use air units to fire from above. The saving grace is that we have the player power Rain of Fire, which allowed me to get damage in. For some reason, if the ground troops attempted to hit the boss, they would just not get damage in, which was a pain. Sooner or later, we take down the Gravemind and complete the mission. This has been Halo Wars 2 with Infantry Only. We beat the main game and DLCs on Legendary and many skulls active. This was a super fun and challenging run to go through. I plan to do more Halo Wars and Halo content in the future. Share your opinions and thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you have any challenge runs idea for me to try. I'm thinking the next challenge will be something to do with Halo Reach. As the video is wrapping up, I want to talk about a few things. First is that a few of my past challenge run videos have performed extremely well, which I was happily surprised. I want to say thank you to everyone who checked out my video and channel and for your support. It's been an awesome experience to build a community here and be accepted by so many people. Thank you again, and I'm extremely thankful. Second is that I had some people talk about audio issues, and I mentioned this in the previous video, but I just wanted to bring it up again. I did some research, minor tweaking of mic settings, and ended up getting a new editing software. Beforehand, I was using Movavi, which was nice, but not the best. Now, I hope with Premiere Pro, things will look and sound much better. If you have any feedback, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you for tuning into the video. Make sure to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Try to do something kind for someone today, whether it's a small or large gesture. This is your boy, Skilled Fawn, and I'm out.